Welcome to another episode of the All That Podcast. And if you've been a regular listener on this podcast, and you will be very familiar with my next guest. Um, she was a guest during season 1 of my podcast. She was my co-host for season 2 of my podcast, and now she's a returning guest for season 3. None other than the one, the only, Kelly Gandy. How are you, Kelle?
I'm good. How are you? It
I'm
feels different that we're not like in the studio together. Like we were
exactly.
the last
It's
season.
weird. I don't see your Diet Coke or.
Don't worry.
There it is. It's perfect that it's blurred because we don't want no lawsuit. But that's perfect. Wow, crazy. Look at that. Zoom looking out for us.
I know, right? They're like, ma'am, no, not today.
Right. So we come to discuss a very deep topic, important topic, and that is loving an addict and all that comes with that, your experience with that. And, I feel like we have a lot of conversation around, you know, going into an addict's perspective, which is necessary, obviously. But seldom do I hear, the viewpoint of the people that love the addict, that's trying to help the addict. You know what I mean? It's rare that you hear that perspective. So I appreciate you coming on and kind of, I don't want to put this pressure on you, but kind of being a voice for people that's going through exactly what you have been going through. So this question, when I just thought it in my head, it's not funny, but it's the way I was going to ask, like, how long have you been loving an addict? But it's not.
It's like not a normal question,
No, it's not. Yeah.
so I've had several addicts in my life.
Okay.
And then the one that is the most prominent has probably been for the past at least 10 years.
Okay.
So
So you
um
were 18 when it.
I was still in high school.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Got you.
And then obviously, like, as all of us have gotten older, you start to realize some other people in your lives that also have the same issues. But there is a difference, I feel like, between like somebody who abuses alcohol and then somebody who abuses drugs. And it's two completely different ways that you handle
Hmm.
somebody with that type of addiction.
So for the one that was most prominent in your life, what was the addiction to drugs or alcohol or both?
To drugs.
Okay, to drugs.
Mhm. And then I have some friends, obviously, or I guess I shouldn't even. I'm trying to be vague with everything to respect
Yeah,
everybody's privacy. So
right.
everybody's going to be a friend in this story. But you have friends who are addicted to alcohol, or you hear of people who have an addiction to alcohol or different types of drugs. So I
Right.
feel like as we started getting older, being adults start setting in, bills start stressing you
Mm-hmm.
out.
For sure, for sure. So, um, do you remember the moment, just speaking to the most prominent one,
Mhm.
do you remember the moment that you found out that there was drug use, and how did you find out?
Um, I don't know if there was ever just this like big
Mm-hmm.
moment where you kind of started like pointing out different things like, hey, I noticed that when I'm around them, sometimes they get super angry and they don't act like themselves. Or you might see stuff laying around that you're like, that might, you know what I mean?
Right.
I think for me, I had already put it into my head that this was something that that person was dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it actually was confirmed, I got a call one day that was just like, hey, do you want to meet up? And we do lunch. There's some stuff that a part of my process of coping with it or dealing with it or trying to get better is to admit to your friends and people that you're close to that you do have a problem. So we went to lunch and it was like, I just want to let you know that I have been dealing with a drug issue. And at that point, I had already said, I know. And I'm glad that you're realizing it and that you are coming to people to kind of look for that guidance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you felt in that moment, I'm guessing since you said you already kind of had an inclination that it was going on, you felt at that lunch, I'm pretty sure you felt a sense of relief in a way that it was expressed, and now were you thinking like, okay, now we can get to the point of recovery?
Yes.
Hmm.
But I think a big thing for anybody who hasn't loved an addict or been close to an addict or anything like that, it's rarely just a one-time occasion.
Right.
So in my mind at that time, at that age, I was thinking, okay, like this is a great time for it to be pointed out.
Hmm.
You have such a long life ahead of you, and recovery now is the best time. And that obviously, 10 years later, we're in a completely different scenario. The amount of times I've been called for lunch to say, hey, I relapsed is more times than I can think of.
Hmm.
So I think you do start off with a lot of hope, and then you just realize becoming somebody who loves somebody that has an addiction, it's almost like a waiting game. When's the next time? Which is
Right.
it's sad because you've almost kind of lost that hope, but then you have it. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's kind of like a mixed emotion.
Yeah. Can you talk about, and I haven't um, had anybody that I'm close with be an addict per se, but I've had, people that I'm close with go through things and they relapse in different ways.
Mhm.
And, I get to this point where I get frustrated with them.
Mhm.
And it kind of, I kind of feel bad because like because I know they're going through something, but I can't help but be frustrated because you start thinking like, okay, do you want to get better, or like, okay, now you're just doing this to yourself. You have these kind of probably, in retrospect, selfish thoughts. So can you talk about the frustration that people who is close to an addict deals with, that frustration or maybe even resentment?
Yeah. So, and we can probably get into this later.
Mm-hmm.
The person that we're speaking about, their addiction went far beyond what I was thinking that it was going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the time that I know the most that I was extremely frustrated. And there are several times like I'll call other people just to vent because it's not, I don't know, somebody's addiction or your own addiction. You just feel almost kind of like ashamed to talk about it to people. So I always try to reach out to friends who I know um, what I have been dealing with and all that stuff. So there's several times where I've called where I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm done babysitting. I need to just like cut this person out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in that moment because I could never do that. But there was a time last year where I told them, I was like, I hope that this is honestly like your last, like your rock bottom. And they told me, I honestly can't tell you if it was. And that was probably the most frustrated I've ever been in my life because it's like, then what is going to change it if this scenario wasn't it? And it's hard because you have the guilt of what if I didn't do enough,
Right.
or like
Mm-hmm.
what if I don't know. It's definitely like one of the things that comes along with loving an addict is that frustration and like the everyday wondering like, okay, is today the day that they're going to relapse? Is today the day that they're going to take it too far? And then um it's just like what you said in the ways that your friends have relapsed. It's like, how many times do I have to tell you? How many times do I have
Mm-hmm.
to continue to have the same conversation with you?
Right.
But and that goes into so many different aspects of life. Like I know that
Mm-hmm.
anyone who follows me, I'm very open about mental health awareness and like addiction awareness
Mm-hmm.
because I do believe that there's a lot of people who don't feel like they can talk about it, and they probably are feeling like if I talk about this again, I'm going to make them mad. And
Right.
unfortunately, people do get frustrated, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is just going to give up on you for it.
Speaking of giving up, and just be completely honest, have you gotten to the point, ever gotten to the point, not that you stayed there for an extended period of time, but have you ever gotten to the point or had the thought of like, I don't care anymore? Not that you don't care, but you kind of washed your hands of being worried.
No,
Okay.
I've gotten to the point where I have like cut them out
Mm-hmm.
for an extended period of time, but the worry never ends. Because for me, like I said, you, you want to not care,
Mm-hmm.
but with the type of addiction that this type of person has, or like somebody who is heavily into alcohol, like to that extent, you never know when the like last day is for them. So for me, I can't not care. And then even when I do cut the person out, it just kind of feels like I just need to grow up, you know, and I hate feeling like, oh, I need to grow up and get over it and like put it past myself and just be the bigger person. But it really is such like an exhausting process to like go over it with somebody for years and years and years. And then to
Mm-hmm.
never kind of get that reassurance that this will be the last time, I promise. Like, and I guess I'm thankful that they're honest.
Right.
They're not telling me, I promise you, you don't have to worry about me. And then I quit worrying and something
Mm-hmm.
happened and I didn't do enough, you know?
Right. So when people are, let's say you have a friend that's an alcoholic, uh, and they get really belligerent off of alcohol, and like you're in a social setting, right? We all probably have that friend. When you're in a social setting and you kind of have to play babysitter the whole night to try to not get them to that point because you know where they can go.
Yeah.
So can you, if you've dealt with this, bring us into your mindset when you go out with said person?
Um, it's hard to say
Hmm.
because if I know that my friend has a drinking problem, I won't go out with them
Okay.
or I won't drink around them. There's a difference between like somebody who has a drinking problem and then somebody who just likes to drink, you know, and
Right.
like knows when they need to stop, when they need to do all that. And that's kind of like the prominent addict in my life who is a drug addict. Like
Hmm.
we've all done stuff. I mean, we're in college, you know, and that was my choice to like not do anything anymore.
Right.
Because who am I to say, get your shit together? Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, you're
Get your
good.
shit
Yeah.
together. Or, you know, but I'm still doing it. You know, I just feel like the little bit of support to show that somebody can still have fun with you without you
Hmm.
needing to think of using, you know, drugs or using alcohol. But again, like I still go out and I still drink, but
Yeah.
I'll do it around people who I know aren't going to be pushed into a further, like, I don't know, for like people who have, I'm trying to make this make sense, but
Hmm.
people who have drug addiction, sometimes alcohol leads it to weed and then they start smoking and like everything's a gateway for
Right.
them. And I know that because I've seen like when this person would go sober, then they'd start slowly getting back into drinking. And
Hmm.
then they would start getting back into smoking weed, which I don't care. But then for them, I know specifically that, okay, when that's not doing enough, then they move on to the next thing. And so then it's, you start getting more and more anxious as they
Hmm.
get through each of them. And so that's why with addicts like that, I try to just like make sure it's a good time without any of that stuff.
When you were experimenting in college,
Mhm.
was what the prominent person had been through, was that always on the forefront of your mind when you were doing these things, or was it you were just living life at that point?
No, and
Hmm.
to be honest, I was doing it with them. I
Okay.
think when I was younger, I didn't realize like to the extent, like
Hmm.
I said, they had told me before, okay, like I'm ready to recover, like I'm not going to do it anymore, or I'm not going to get to like that extent because I had never got on like those types with
Yeah.
them. Um, so I think I was naive in the moment. So like I would still like, you know, hang out with them, not think anything of it. And then as I got older and as the relapses continued to happen, but then the relapses would continue to happen with harder drugs, then I started to realize, okay, this is something that I have to completely cut out.
Right. So I'm the kind of person, like, if somebody opens up to me, tells me, not even, let me backtrack. Not even tell me anything. If I observe a person and I see how they are as a person, I'm always the kind of person that tries to figure people out. So I'm like, okay, how did this person get to this point? So I try to, try to kind of look and, analyze their life. I'm like, okay, so maybe that happened, this happened, boom, boom, boom. So with your prominent person, did you do that? Like you were trying to piece together how did we get here? Like what happened? Was he going through something? Were they he or she did they experience something traumatic? Or did you ever try to get to the root
Mhm.
of the addiction is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and again, it took it was a learning process of
Hmm.
like learning addiction. So at first I was like, okay, maybe they just did it one time,
Hmm.
it was fun, and they like were addicted to the feeling.
Right.
But as I get older and I like look more into it and I start having, more people around me that start kind of can or creating their own addiction,
Hmm.
you start to realize that there are deeper issues usually to it. So um you might not even know exactly what that person went through, because unless y'all are super close, or if they are somebody who just doesn't talk about stuff that's happened in their life. But
Hmm.
also I think people don't realize is a lot of us have underlying issues that we're not even aware.
Right.
And I know that we discussed this. I mean, we talked about abusive relationships before.
Hmm.
There's an underlying issue to that. And it wasn't something that I knew. And I probably would have never known if I didn't go see someone. So I think I was trying to like figure it out, but without knowing their whole life, you don't really, you can't put together. Um, Obviously, within the last year, I've started to learn more just because we had a bigger kind of issue that happened.
Right.
Um, which it's funny because I saw this thing and I wanted to post it. And it's crazy because we want to criminalize drug addicts and like people who use drugs, but we're not looking at the bigger issue of why drugs are being used in the first place,
Yeah.
or the majority of the reasons why drugs are used in the first place. And that's
Mhm.
usually because of traumas that people have gone through, that they don't have the actual resources to go get help or the money.
Yeah. It's
um
coping mechanism, which
yes,
is
yes,
which is
it's like
leading to my next question I was going to ask is, you brought up going to see someone yourself. Do you feel like there is adequate help for addicts?
no, I don't even think for like the stuff that I've been through,
Hmm.
there's enough resources. So, um, I've had a lot of stuff that's happened in my life. I really didn't try to go to therapy whenever I was in high school or anything like that. And I remember I couldn't talk to my family about the stuff that I was going through. So I literally Googled and found like a live chat, and it was like a like a 7-day free trial where I could talk to her, but then they
Hmm.
charged. But I did not have money back then. I mean, I was working at like Massage Envy or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I tried to like capitalize on like 7 days. And then I had to tell her, I was like, hey, I'm sorry, but like I honestly can't afford to keep. But at that point, you haven't even gotten into the extent of all the issues that could be going on. So
Yeah.
um now being older, I've tried to go to see somebody again. Insurance hardly covers it. Luckily, the insurance that I do have was able to cover like 5 free sessions. But if you start thinking about it, it's like your
Hmm.
first session is, hi, I'm Kelly Gandy. I'm this age. I grew up in Houston, Texas, XYZ. Then you get into the next session, which might be early childhood. Then the next session is elementary, junior high, next session, high school, college. Then by the time you've actually learned somebody and like
Yeah.
what could potentially be causing these traumas, and then you're ready to start kind of dissecting all of it and teaching somebody coping mechanisms, they're out of free sessions,
Yeah.
you know? And I mean, I don't know if you've looked into prices for mental health, but it's insane. Um, so I don't think that there's enough resources. And it's unfortunate because I think that that's, or at least with this person, was one of the main issues, was not being able to talk to anybody without feeling judged, or wasn't really aware that there were underlying issues, got into drugs, got addicted, and then felt like, well, why would I go spend all this money when I can just buy it from a dealer and not deal with it in that moment?
Right. Let me plug somebody real fast. My friend Jordan Williams is a licensed therapist. She has like really, 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 really good prices, like $20, right? Like so, yeah. Jordan Williams, look her up. So, did your prominent person go to rehab?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell, did the person tell you their experience with rehab?
No, not
No.
really. They did outpatient, so it wasn't like an inpatient type of situation just because
Hmm.
they were worried about losing their job, which is also another thing is like people want to get better, but companies don't understand addiction, or it's like taboo to talk about, or taboo to have a worker who might work their ass off but has issues that they're dealing with you know what I mean.
Right.
um, so they did outpatient. I think some were maybe a little bit more beneficial than the others. Some of them really took the steps of what they had to go through to kind of deal with it. But like I said, it's kind of an ongoing thing that, you know, who knows how many more times they might be in rehab, you know.
Right. I think um one of the biggest, trying to find the right word, one of the biggest contributors to addiction and mental health issues is social media. And I say that because social media has made us a very, very, very comparative society. People are
Mhm.
constantly comparing themselves to false realities on social media, and even a step further, you see these things, like you literally can just be scrolling on Twitter and you can literally see somebody get killed on video. And we've seen hundreds and hundreds of videos of people getting killed. Women, just the other day, I'm watching a video. This woman, luckily, she was able to lock her door in time, but getting followed by a man in her house. All of this, I think, is contributing to where we are today in terms of mental health and in terms of addiction. And to that, you say what?
um I totally agree,
Yeah.
because we could also talk about when a celebrity has an overdose.
Yeah.
When Mac Miller overdosed, it was like an outpour of support and condolences and sadness and oh, let's talk about drug awareness. Well, we
Hmm.
should be talking about it before the person dies as well.
Right.
But you have Demi Lovato, who overdosed but lived, and then people make jokes, like crack jokes, about her all the time, which makes absolutely no sense to
Right.
me. So it's like it only benefits people to discuss drug awareness when it's somebody that they care about.
Yeah.
um, which in my opinion, if a drug addict is reading stuff like this, that might throw them deeper into their addiction. Or I think a big thing, I sent you this one thing.
Hmm.
I get so frustrated when a celebrity dies and everybody starts discussing, is addiction a disease? And there's the people who have never had an addiction in their life, never been around somebody who has had an addiction, love somebody who's an addict, and they're voicing their opinions, but they're not understanding the actual backlash that they're causing because of it. So I do believe that addiction is a disease. I believe it was originally a choice, but a choice that we're not breaking down why that choice was made in the first place, trauma, whatever issues that they might be dealing with that they can't talk about. But your body becomes dependent on something if you use it enough. Like a hangover essentially is your body
Hmm.
craving more. Some people will just start drinking and get that going again. And then there's some people who know, okay, I just got to ride out the addiction or ride out the hangover and I'll be good.
Right.
Um, and it's the same thing with an addict. So then that eventually becomes a disease. And I think that people think because we're saying, oh, addiction is a disease, that we're comparing it to cancer or leukemia, where people didn't really have a choice. And it's like, no, there's so many different diseases. Like gingivitis is a disease, but
Yeah.
it started when you didn't brush your teeth. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
wouldn't compare gingivitis to cancer at all, you know?
Right.
Um, so it's just frustrating because when you're out there and you're speaking hatred, because that's genuinely what it is, if you have so much resentment for an addict that you don't even know, and you're just saying, you chose this, you're a low life, you're all this, you're not realizing that you're not only hurting the addict and probably pushing them further into what they're already in, but you're not realizing the family members and the friends and the coworkers who are supporting these addicts and wake up every day wondering, am I going to talk to them again? Is today the day that they relapse? Are they going to overdose? You know what I mean? Like, it's an everyday process with loving an addict. So I just wish people like kind of were a little bit more aware when they say the things that they say, like the amount of power that your words have. And that's social media.
Facts. So
I was like, let me get off my rant.
no, you're fine. Did you see I'm trying alone. So addiction, I feel like when you're dealing with someone with addiction, obviously it affects everyone around the person in many different ways. And in this way, did you see how you were trying your want to care for this person and, you know, looking out for this person, checking in on this person kind of attracted other addicts into your life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think because I have like that soft spot,
Yes.
that the more people I meet who have addictions, like I just kind of
You want to help.
want to like take in, you know, just because I've already been in the, I don't want to say in the game, but in the process for years and years and years and years, you know, even though it is an exhausting one, it's, I don't know, if I can help in any way, I would prefer, you know, because I know that they might not be able to talk to somebody about it. And that might be just talking to somebody that day and might be keeping them away from whatever that they are addicted to that day. I don't know. But yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. But yeah, I was gonna say, isn't it funny that I said as I gotten older, I've noticed.
Yeah, when you said that, you know, I put two and two together. But so what is or has been the scariest moment that you've experienced in loving an addict?
So I kind of, I guess, have somewhat been hinting at it throughout the podcast, but last year in September, this person overdosed and was found dead. And I guess before I get into the story, they were able to be revived. But I had gone out the night before and I was supposed to drive to Oklahoma to visit my family the next morning. And I probably shouldn't have been out as late as I was, but I drove home, packed, and then I was telling myself I'm just going to take an hour nap and then I'm going to shower, get up, drive to Oklahoma. I always keep my phone on do not disturb, or at least I used to. And I had it on silent. I have it on do not disturb. Like I try to stay off of it as much as possible. And that has changed since that morning. So I had taken a nap and I woke up and I had a ton of calls and a ton of text messages. And it was like 8 a.m. at this point. So I was like, this isn't normal. And so the first thing that I checked were my text messages. I don't know why I didn't just call back. And the text message that I read was so-and-so overdosed and was found dead. And there wasn't any type of update after that. So I immediately was like floored. I was like, or I think I was in shock, honestly. Like I black out that moment. I can't remember exactly, but
yeah.
I remember calling them and they said that they were able to, they called 911. 911 talked them through CPR because this person had never done CPR before. And they did CPR up until the ambulance was there and was able to provide Narcan. And so for anybody who has dealt with an addict and it's gotten to that point, it's like you start a grieving process, even though they were able to be revived. I feel like I was still grieving a death. I don't know how to explain it. Like I was, or grieving. I don't know how it was, but it was a full grieving process because I went through different emotions. So like immediately after the call, I'm pretty sure I called you. I sat in my shower and cried for like 2 hours. And then it was I had never dealt with an overdose before. I had heard about it with, you know, celebrities and stuff like that. So I didn't really understand the process of Narcan. So I was like, okay, so this gets their heart going again, but can their heart stop again? Or because he was technically pronounced dead, how long did they go without oxygen to the brain? Is there going to be any issues with brain damage? Like, so there was a whole list of different things that I was thinking through. And then it went to a different emotion where I was like, I want to run away from it all. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to, like, I was almost working my way to like the anger phase. And so
Right.
one of my girlfriends packed up a bag with me and I went to Dallas. And it's so funny because it's a perfect example of how we talk about what you see on social media is not
Mm-hmm.
reality at all. So I'm over here posting like a gallon margarita, all that stuff, but no one knew like I'm literally
Yeah.
in
Going
a
through
in
it.
a mental breakdown. Like um and so then I came back from Dallas and I got into the anger phase. So then I was lashing out at everyone. I probably should have been fired. I like yelled at my boss and was cussing and all that stuff. And thankfully, somebody that I work with has loved an addict,
Mm-hmm.
so it was nice to finally have somebody because then I like the anger phase could settle because I could talk to somebody about how I was feeling because somebody was like, this isn't like you. Like you're never angry like this. But the anger phase went on for a while and it went on with them. I told him like, I don't want to talk to you right now. I'll deal with it when I have to, and it was like every week it was kind of like a check-in to say like, I know you don't want to talk, but all that stuff. So people, I don't know, it's like a grieving process each relapse, but then when you deal with an overdose, it's like to a greater degree,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's never going to be the same. I'm 10 times more worried, all of that.
That's interesting that how you described going through a grieving process even though the person is still alive.
Yeah.
I've never heard it explained like that. It's pretty interesting.
I think the grieving process to me was grieving the idea of what I thought their
Mm-hmm.
addiction was. Like I didn't think that it was the extent that it had been.
Mm-hmm.
They had dabbled in heavier drugs and stuff like that, but then they always went back to like that one go-to. And I think that that grieving for me was realizing there's a bigger, like this is way bigger than anything that I was aware of. And then it also was kind of like grieving, not to make it about myself, but grieving what my life will be like moving forward because
Mm-hmm.
I can't give up on somebody like that. And knowing this might happen again. I might wake up to this text message again. Like nobody ever wants to wake up to that message,
Oh.
and then just to like hear the details of how he was found or how they were found and
Mm-hmm.
all of that was just tough, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, to your knowledge for however long before you made that phone call, to you, they were dead
Yes.
because the text message said that, that was the case. So,
Yeah.
for minutes, you really, that was really your reality. Like, this
Yeah. And
person
I
is
think
gone.
like I was just in so much shock. Like I texted back
Mhm.
before even calling because I was like, what are you talking about? Like literally an hour ago, I was up packing my bags,
Right.
like I went to sleep for maybe 45 minutes at the most. And so then finally I called. And then when I was talking to my friend, they were describing, they hadn't even really said that gotten to the point of he was revived.
Mhm.
It was like going through the details of how they were found and what they looked like and what they were thinking when they, and so I'm like still thinking, oh my God, like what is going on? And then it was like, well, 911 talked me through and I was able to get a little bit of a heartbeat back up until the ambulance got there.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's part of it too, is like my mind was already like in the thought process that this person had passed. But then also I didn't want to see that person for a while
Mhm.
because the image of what that person described to me, I was scared that I was going to look at them and see that. So it was like avoidance on my part,
Right.
like every degree.
Right. And you hear, this cliche, you hear it all the time, and people just kind of take it for granted, about you never knowing what somebody is going through, and you should always, treat people with kindness. And I just had an example of this. Um, so I'm talking with this guy. I see this guy every week, and you know, he found out I had a podcast. He, is asking me, what are you? Because I was listening to this particular podcast, and I was taking notes on the podcast to do clips or whatever. And so he was like, what are you talking about on that one? So I was like, this episode is about losing a parent. And I said, I wanted to do an episode on that. And so he said, man, that's a deep topic. He said, my parents are, basically just here, like just living. I mean, just breathing, but not really, there, in nursing homes. Then he said, but what's worse than that is that I lost a grandson. And then he pointed at his arm, and he was like, I have chills right now. I see this man every week.
Yeah.
And who knew that he had lost his grandchild? So that just, when he said that, I thought about that cliche quote of, you really never know what somebody is going through.
Yeah. You really don't.
Yeah.
And that's why I think when we had talked about it on your podcast, the overdose hadn't happened yet, but it was like stuff that I was obviously dealing with. I think it was like getting a little bit heavier at that time.
Yeah.
But even going back to work, like I couldn't tell my company, like, can I have more days off? Like I'm dealing with something, because fear of judgment, and not even like I care about me, but like I don't want them to judge like this person that I love, you know what I mean? And so it's crazy because you can literally sit by somebody every single day. You can see somebody post every single day. Celebrities, we literally have no idea what's going on in their life, and it might be bigger than anything that somebody might be, I don't know. It's just, it's a crazy concept. It's exactly what you said.
I always feel like, there's a why. And it's a shame, another buzzword, is that right? I don't know. Another one of those words that are like, everywhere, trendy, is stigma, right? So it's just a stigma around mental health and addiction, because you couldn't even go to your job and, explicitly explain what was going on because of this stigma around it and judgment. They'd be like, oh, she has somebody, close to her who's an addict, and you got that, and, and it's just this stigma that it makes it hard. It's hard for you to come out and express it, and you're not even the person going through it. So imagine the person going through it and what, how they feel,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, and that's why I always just try, it's easier said than done, but just for people to be more understanding. You literally don't know somebody's story. You don't know what somebody's going home to, whether that is an abusive husband or wife, or grieving a child that they lost, or, like some people just aren't open about the stuff that they're going through. And that's why I mentioned that, like the Facebook fights that people get into about addiction, and saying like addiction, people who are addicted are X, Y, and Z. But people like me who are loving somebody and not thinking that of them are reading it, and immediately is like an anger reaction. And I didn't even choose addiction. I never once in my life chose addiction, but I deal with it. And I have like it essentially kind of somewhat chose me secondhand. And so it's like, how dare you speak on things that you don't know? Or it's like, imagine saying that and like you don't know that your best friend has an addiction. You know what I mean? You're just like, but your best friend knows that this is how you feel about that topic, so they're not coming to you and having that discussion.
Exactly.
It's just so counterproductive.
Exactly. So, lastly, could you give a listener who might be going through what you're going through, or might go through in the future what you're going through? Could you give them any advice on how to deal with this situation?
I would just say find a support system.
Mhm.
I know that's hard, and I hate to even say try to find somebody that you can talk to, like a therapist, because we just said that it's
Yeah.
expensive
Hmm.
besides your
Jordan.
friend.
Yeah.
I might hit him up.
Yeah.
Um, but it really is like if I didn't have a support system, I literally don't know where I would be, because
Hmm.
there are so many days where I'm just like, I want to give up. Like I
Hmm.
can't, you just feel so emotionally drained. And I do have my friends that maybe don't fully understand, but at least give their condolences,
Hmm.
and or there
Right.
have been times where I'm like, I'm done, I'm not doing it anymore, and they'll remind me, you can't give up, they need you more than anything, all that. So um it's tough, and it's an ongoing thing that's going to happen all the time, but just finding the right people, I would say. I know it's such a cliche advice, but
Yeah. Sometimes, a lot of times, cliches are actually,
I mean, they're cliche for a reason
right.
because they're probably true. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Exactly. I feel
So,
like, I'm sorry, you want to say something?
no, but I do have another point that I think
Okay.
I sent you. I wanted to talk, I didn't know how I wanted to fit it in, and I
Hmm.
don't know if I'll be able to find the quote, but um, I know I had sent you, somebody had made a story on Instagram, and they were talking about how, I guess somebody had asked them the question, and this is a perfect example of people probably trying to find a way to reach out to somebody for advice.
Hmm.
They had reached out, and it was like, oh, ask me questions or whatever. And so the question was, have you dealt with addiction, or have you ever loved an addict? And this person's response was along the lines of like, a lot of people in my family are addicts. That's why we don't drink and why we don't do anything. And then could have just left it there, but then said, I'm also trying to get into heaven. So that's another reason why I don't.
Yeah.
And that to me was such, I'm sure you remember when I sent that, that
Yeah.
to me was such an ignorant statement, because it's like, you are actively trying to say that people who have a drinking problem or have a drug problem don't
Hmm.
deserve a spot in heaven,
Right.
like are viewed different in the eyes of their God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so that very well could have been somebody wanting help, reading that response and being like, okay, now I'm gonna recluse even more. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Right.
That's why I just be more open-minded, or like think outside of the box when somebody's reaching out, like, this is an interesting question, I wonder why they're asking these questions,
Right.
maybe I could dig a little bit deeper, instead of like ultimately just cutting off the conversation by ending it with such an ignorant statement.
Right. And people focus on drug addiction, but there's a plethora of addictions. You have food
Mhm.
addiction, which is probably the most prominent in my opinion. Yeah, food addiction, you have addiction, you have all kind of addictions that we can talk about that's troubling,
Mhm.
but we just demonize drug addiction. Um Lastly, I want to say that I feel like you know in the time we are in now, we are so about the individual, which in some cases is good, but I feel like it's, and for on a grand scale it's not. If you think of cultures, back hundreds of years ago, there is not, you don't even have to go 100 years ago. You can just go to like our parents and grandparents' time when something was going on. You know, there's a song by this artist named Betty Wright, and she in the song she was like, "You remember when people used to hear that you were on the verge of breaking up? They used to cook a little food and throw a little party." And try to get y'all to stay together. Like it was this sense of community. Like, what I mean, the whole community is gonna come over, cook food. Like, nah, y'all got to work this out, and you had that support. Or, that'll happen a lot. And I had this epiphany or this thought that I'm saying now when my uncle passed in March, And I was sitting there, and this is, right after he passed. I drove from Katy to Port Arthur, and I got to my grandfather's house, and family was there, friends was there. It's just this big community of everybody coming together to comfort us in our time of loss. And I was like, this is why humans are supposed to have community, because we're not supposed to do this by ourselves. So I think we should, as a society, get back to the thinking of being a community. Nowadays, people don't even know who their next door neighbor is, never speak to them. That used to never be a thing, so because we're all about individuals staying closed in, sheltering ourselves. But we need each other. Other people need you. And if we have that mindset of, doing for the next person, then as a society as a whole, we will move better, we will be better, and we will have less. Not that these problems won't exist, but we can help people get through things. And you got to understand, when you're helping somebody else, you're also helping yourself. So thank you, Kelle, for coming on, being transparent. I know you helped somebody with what you're saying. And speaking of community, as you know, if you need to talk, I'm here. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. All right, that is it for this episode of the All That Podcast. Peace.